Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the News Behind the News with Ralph Cantav on Mix 94.7 FM. I do hope that you've been having a good day and a blessed week so far. This afternoon, we're going to dive into the world of banking and finance. I have here with me Mr. Derek Downs, the General Manager and Director of Windward Island Bank, as well as the President of the St. Martin Bankers Association. So good afternoon, sir, and welcome to the program. Thanks for coming.
Good afternoon, and I'm glad to be here.
Great. It is good to have you here. Of course, I know that the Bankers Association yourself, you've done some media appearances before. You've even been in Parliament. But it's never, I believe that there's never too much information. And, of course, there's different events that have taken place as well that we can definitely speak on. But before we get into, I guess, the seriousness and meat of the matter, I have a question for you as far as, how long have you been in the banking industry, and what about it still interests you?
I've been in banking now going on 34 years. I started at the age of 18 as a bank teller in Barbados at CIBC. And I've moved on from there to, various roles within CIBC, First Caribbean Limited. And then eventually I moved over to Windward Islands Bank after leaving First Caribbean International Bank as the country head there. So I've been in banking a very long time. Basically, what interests me about banking is that I like to help people. I think that that's what banks do, because many of us would not have achieved what we achieved financially had it not been for a bank. A lot of us would not have been able to save for a car or a home, and here's where banks come in to assist people, and I believe that helping people is a good thing. So that is what interests me in banking, the opportunity to help people. Okay, gotcha.
And while COVID has affected everyone, I'm sure that just to the degree it has affected the banking sector on Island as well. So my question for you is, what changes, what do you say the population can expect in the year to come, in the coming years, as we adapt our definition of normal?
One of the major changes that banks are going to focus on, and we at the Windward Islands Bank have been focusing on, is the pushing of the online banking services, digital banking. As you know, the need for social distancing, less contact, the technology has become very important. Emails, it's amazing how before everyone would just bring documents to the bank, but now you can email documents to the bank. You have a lot more of that happening. And clearly, internet banking is where the future is, digital banking. We have done our best to, roll out, whether it's the tap and go with the contactless card, because again, you're trying to reduce contact. We have put on at least 3 online banking drives to encourage people to sign up for online banking, so you don't have to come in the banking halls and wait. As you know, we have the largest ATM network out there, and POS terminal network. So this is something that W.I.B as a bank will be and continue to focus on in the near future. And I can see this is where banking is going. Mobile banking.
Yeah, I was just about to ask about the app.
Right. We have a mobile banking app out there. It does not have as many bells and whistles as Bank of America, for instance. There are a lot of other things that those platforms can do that we cannot do as yet. But certainly, as we go forward, we will be looking to improve in these areas. But the biggest change for me with respect to the effect this pandemic has had on banking, it is the further push and the importance of being able to bank remotely.
And how do you see that affecting the workforce, in terms of what is the skills, the type of workers that you'll be requiring, especially, as the world already is kind of in that direction, but here as we gravitate towards mobile banking in particular?
Indeed, when you start to go digitally, obviously the need for more IT competent people would be important. And certainly as the technology continues to take root, you have to focus on your IT staff And then your customer service staff now must become trained in being able to explain the technology, being able to troubleshoot the technology for those customers who will be using. So you are correct. It will have some impact on staffing, mainly from the point of view of the type of staff that you would want, the type of competencies that you would want to bring on board in light of the fact that digital banking is going to be where the future is going to be. So I do not see digital banking reducing staff per se, but obviously causing one to focus on the type of staff member that you would want to onboard in light of what is going on. Understood.
One of the things that come to mind particularly is, basically, let's say, as it relates to your statements, your bank statements and so forth. That is something that digital offers. But you do have a case where sometimes you maybe not as able to go back as far. They're still having to come to the bank and then you have to pay to get those documents. So do you see that being able to be fully available digitally, or is there a restriction in that?
Not necessarily restriction. It's like, how to put it? Because you're putting in the technology, you're going forward. The records, we have records up to 10 years, but not all of these records are digital records. So that's why once you use the digital platform, you are not able to get some records, which obviously we will not have been offering digitally. And to try to make those digital now would be, very costly and a big task. So that's why once you go online, you may have some restriction in how far you can go back. And you also have to bear in mind that the regulation is that banks retain records for 10 years. Now, obviously, storage costs money, whether it's physical storage or even electronic storage, those things cost money. So once 10 years pass, the bank purges records, right? So if you are trying to retrieve documentation beyond 10 years, physically or digitally, it will not be available because we have to make space for the records as we go along. And there's a need to, whether it's destroy documents or burn them and to purge digital records based on the retention period as authorized by the central bank. Now, you raise a good question as to if you do come and you get the statements physically that you have to pay, right? The reason why that is because for those times we would have provided you with the statements. Now, granted, some people don't keep them, some people lose them, but to reproduce them, paper is involved, time is involved. So then there's a small charge for having to reproduce these statements once you come and ask for them. But what I would say though is that if the statements should have been available digitally, and for some reason it's our fault that they're not available, you do not pay for the hard copies when we give you the hard copies. Okay, because sometimes things can happen. So if it is not the client's fault, if it is something that should have been available digitally, we will not allow you to pay if we have to give you manually.
Okay, understood. And as far as a banking association, what exactly are the tasks and responsibilities that you guys have? What do you do?
That's an issue. What do we do? Well, the Bankers Association is, if you want to say to some degree, the go-between, the entity that stands between, let's say, the central bank or the regulator and the banking sector, the government and the banking sector. It's like a lobbying entity where, how to put it, we come together, we discuss issues that are of common interest because on the one hand, we are competitors. Okay? Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there are certain things that affect us all that the regulator will ask for our input as an organization. The government may ask for our input as an organization. So while we are competitors, we do come together when there is a common issue that we need to speak to. So that's basically the main purpose of the organization, to come together and speak to issues that are of common interest to the sector and help to advise government, help to advise the central bank, because they do search us out to ask us our opinion on certain regulations that they want to issue, certain codes, that is a new corporate governance code. They reach out to us and says, okay, let's hear your thoughts. Because while it is easy for someone to say do, we are the ones who have to implement. We are the ones who have to make it work. So, in the interest of transparency, in the interest of cooperation, the regulator or the government can come to the association and say, what are your thoughts on what we are looking to do? Let's hear what you have to say.
All right. And as far as, going back to COVID, looking back at the relief measures, what are your thoughts on, the rollout of that, and what do you say, well, how significant was it, as a benefit to your clients?
Well, I think that the banks did an extremely great job in responding immediately, as it were, to the COVID situation and providing moratoriums for their clients. Some banks did moratoriums longer than others, but indeed, all of the banks reach out to their clients with some type of assistance, whether it is interest-only payments, whether it is full payment moratoriums, restructuring of facilities, payment holidays. All the banks did an extremely good job in reaching out to their clients. The central bank was very helpful as well, where they supported the banks in providing the moratoriums to customers, and this went a long way in helping customers bridge the period, especially before the SSRP, for instance, came into play. That was monies that they did not have to put out there. Their loan payments, they didn't have to put it out there, not even interest payments. They had to put out there. So this, in my view, was a very great help to a number of businesses and caused them to survive the pandemic.
Gotcha. So in regards to a particular issue, I would say the banks' voice were missing, and I'm referring to I'm referring to the bond that the government floated last year, as an alternative to liquidity loans from the Netherlands. And my question for you is, what were the bank's position, and do you think that another attempt at this would be successful?
Well, when it comes to subscribing to any bond issue, that is not an issue for the banking association. I cannot speak on behalf of any other bank with respect to any debt instrument that they may or may not want to participate in. At the end of the day, the St. Martin government situation with respect to debt, they have to go to Holland first. That's how we understood it. That's what our understanding is. I mean, there may be some differences of opinion legally on whether that is supposed to be so or not. But my understanding is that that was supposed to be the case. So, I mean, it really became a moot point because the government did withdraw the tender, as it were. But would it be successful again in the future? I won't be able to say. I won't know. Obviously, it would depend on the circumstances, what arrangements the government have with the CFT and with Holland. And so there's a lot more than what meets the eye at the end of the day that goes into things like that. So it's very difficult to predict what may or may not happen if the government tries to raise monies in that manner again. It's very difficult to predict.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the response on that. And what do you see as necessary steps to help bolster our economy and your bank in particular? How can that play a role in this as well?
Well, we have been definitely playing our role in assisting many businesses out there, with capital to continue doing what they're doing. We are in joint, if you want to say, partnership with the NRPB, a small business loan program. We are one of the institutions that have joined with the NRPB in this program, which I believe is going pretty well. And I really applaud them for the efforts that they're putting in with respect to this program, because it is doing a good thing for many entrepreneurs out there who have a good idea. It gives them an opportunity to make that idea a success. So we've been helping in that regard. As we all know, St. Martin's economy is primarily based on tourism. We can't get away from it. So there's very little the banks can do, or rather, there isn't much more the banks can do if the island's tourism does not pick up. Yesterday there were 6, I think, ships on the island, which was a good thing for the island. What I think the island needs to focus on is to keep COVID under control. And my hat's off to the Ministry of Health and all those who have played a role in the very good numbers that you see with respect to COVID cases on the island. You know, the first responders and the medical community. So this is what the island has to focus on. Keep COVID under control. Give tourists the sense of security that they can come to the island and not contract COVID. Obviously, with the low numbers, there would not be that pressure on the hospital. So if someone does come on the island and need medical attention, they will have the availability to get that medical attention. So these are things that are going to be very important to the economy of the island picking back up from where it left off prior to COVID. So outside of us getting those tourists coming back to the island, to our shores, the bank can do so much, right? But it would be very limited. You need that tourist to come back to the island.
Gotcha. But even considering the World Bank project, outside of that, what is your bank's policy as it relates to macro, macro to medium-sized enterprise loans, particularly, of course, for local clients?
We have done our best with respect to small business lending. The most difficult segment of the business community to lend to is the small business sector. Why? Because many entrepreneurs, they have a good idea, they don't have a history, they don't have collateral. So in many cases, small business loans are either unsecured or partially secured. And here's where you see some of the largest delinquency percentages in the bank's loan portfolio. The small business portfolio is where the highest delinquencies show themselves, right? Now, we have done our part, but you would find throughout the world, this is the community that governments put things in place to help, because governments understand that the banks are lending customers money. And I am sure that if you're a depositor of W.I.B, you would like to know you can come back and get your money. So you need for us to lend it out responsibly. So if there is an area that is of the greatest risk, I am sure that you will want us to take whatever necessary risk mitigating measures we can put in place, that if we lend to that area, we can retrieve those monies. And as I said before, you have small business guarantee schemes in many islands, even Holland. Holland has a 100% small business guarantee for Saba and Statia. 100% small business guarantee for Saba and Statia. And that's why I applaud the NRPB's program, because while it is not 100%, the working capital piece is 80% guaranteed, and with the asset purchase or asset repair portion, 65% is a grant. So the bank takes the risk at 35%. So it's a little bit higher than I would have loved, but at the end of the day, it is better than nothing. So while, yes, I know banks are out there doing their best to help the small business community, it is not easy. And sometimes people are very disappointed because everybody believes their idea will work. And we all know that more than 50% of small businesses go under within the first year to 3 years. Yes? So how do you bridge that gap? Programs like what the NRPB is doing helps to bridge that gap. Small business guarantee schemes help to bridge that gap. Micro enterprise funding outside of the bank helps to bridge that gap.
Okay, yeah, because that's a question a lot of people have. So I appreciate your your response to that. But as far as industries or maybe businesses, business models, what would you say are those that would attract a bank, to invest their funds in? And what would you also add for anyone listening who would like the bank support in a project or idea is absolutely necessary, in order to give a bank a guarantee to invest in that individual or venture?
Okay. I must admit I don't look at it from that perspective, as to say I was singling out an area within the economy that I would, lend more money to than another area.
Okay.
I look at it this way. Once your project is bankable, it doesn't matter where it could be in real estate, it could be in retail trade, it could be in transportation, it could be in communication, it could be in utilities, you name it. Once your proposal is bankable, our doors are open to help you. Yes? So, I would say to the investor out there, maybe, look around and see where you see there's a need, where you see there's an ability for another entrance and another entrant into the marketplace. And again, once you have done your homework and we can see that this can work, we will help. Doesn't matter what sector of the economy it's in.
Okay. So something that comes to mind is also then, what are the main type of loans would you say that you operate with, that you're typically engaged in?
Well, we have basically, if you want to say, 3 categories of loans. You have your consumer loan, which will be for, you want to buy a car, travel, buy furniture, pay bills, those sorts of things. Then there's the residential mortgage, which, as you know, to buy land, to buy property, to renovate property. And then thirdly, there's the business loan or the commercial loan. Some are larger than others, but at the end of the day, it's the business loan. So when you look at whether you issue a credit card or overdraft facility, it's all along the same basic things. So you take a credit card, you buy consumer goods with it, you travel with it, which is similar to a travel loan or a normal consumer loan. So the loans that we give are in 3 categories, as I mentioned. You have the normal retail loan, you have the personal mortgage, and then you have your commercial loan, which will be for business activities, whether it's construction of a business premises, whether it's working capital support, whether it is to buy inventory, I will call that the commercial loan. Okay.
One of the things that often make headlines, or rather common discussions here locally, is indeed mortgages.
Mm-hmm.
You often hear people complain or their dissatisfaction in terms of the barriers, maybe, or the requirements that exist in getting a mortgage, especially even sometimes where there are cases of more than one income. So let's say a married couple.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question for you is, what is your take on ways in which the bank, or your bank, because I know you can't speak for other banks, can further assist, particularly the middle class part of St. Martin, in being able to become homeowners and become, owners of wealth, on the island as well?
But the first thing I say is that it is not fair that this comment continues to be circulated out there, that the banks do not want to help people to get homes. It is not an accurate comment. W.I.B, including other banks on the island, have been doing 100% financing to purchase property. 100%. You can't get better than that. Nowhere in the world. You cannot get better than that. And that's what some of the banks have been doing on the island. Some banks are 90 and 95%. So I really take exception to the comment that the banks on the island are not trying to help people to own their own homes. The problem with home ownership in St. Martin is that the things are too costly, okay, in relation to wages, because there is a debt service ratio that the central bank has in place. There is a way to calculate this debt service ratio. And if you do not qualify based on your debt service ratio, we are not able to help. Even if we want to give you 100% of the money, interest rates on the island are the lowest they have ever been. I've been on this island now going 17 years, and you have interest rate for mortgages below 5%. That has never been the case. So I really do not know where this constant complaint comes from that the banks on the island are not trying to help homeowners out there. It is absolutely not true. Now, what is true is that our rates are probably not as low as in Europe. Our rates are probably not as low as in the US. But you cannot compare a St. Martin's economy and a St. Martin's banking environment with the same as the United States of America or Europe. The cost of living here is much higher, right? So because the operating cost of a bank here is much higher, you cannot expect to get the sort of rates that you see in developed countries where the cost of living or the cost of business is much lower. But again, many of the banks out there have been carrying on mortgage loan campaigns. I know there are cases where the bank offers to pay. Let me speak to a SPIP specifically. Yes, we have offered your first year's insurance premium as well on the bank once you bought the Be Sure insurance policy. So not only 100%, we had a campaign where we pay your first year home insurance premium. If we were switching a mortgage from another bank, we pay the costs associated with that, some of the legal costs and the prepayment penalties. So again, Ralph, it's not fair to say that banks are not trying to help.
Okay, but I do have a question for you in regards to interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Considering, as you mentioned, costs here on the island are pretty high,
Mm-hmm.
and expected to get much higher. So do you see this affecting the interest rate at present? And I guess one of the things you look at is interest rates, again, as you mentioned earlier, tend to be much lower in other places.
Mm-hmm.
But I know W.I.B has a pretty impressive reserve, and some of the other banks as well. So what do you see those rates becoming much lower, or just being stabilized to where they are right now?
That's a very good question, and it depends on how the bond market in the United States go next year. Right now, the Treasury bill rate is 0, or very close to, if not 0, by now, and that influences the ability of banks to reinvest funds and make a return. So if you see the ability to make a return on reinvestment of funds starting to come back, interest rates are going to go up, right? If that continues to drag out the way it is now, the worst that will happen is that interest rates will remain where they are now, which is, as I said before, on this island is very low. Going a little lower is difficult to call. But a lot depends on how 2022, the early part, especially the first quarter, works out, especially in the United States of America, because there is where most of the excess funds that banks reinvest outside of the island, because you cannot invest everything outside. There are restrictions. But that is where that's some of the safest investments that you will ever have currently is U.S. Treasuries. So you have to wait and see what happens to U.S. Treasuries.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the News Behind the News with Ralph Kintav on Mix 94.7 FM. And I'm joined with the director, managing... keep messing up your title.
General manager,
my bad.
I'm
thinking managing director, sorry. General manager of the Windward Island Bank.
It's the general managing director.
Okay, general managing director of the Windward Island Bank and president of the St. Martin Banking Association.
Yes.
As far as banking is concerned, now, one of the things that also come to mind is offshore banking.
Mm-hmm.
I know that is, it could be a buzzword, let's say, but are our banks here locally engaged in that? And is that something that benefits our economy?
We do interact with the offshore client. Obviously, from a compliance point of view, The offshore client is much of a much higher risk. So the requirements and controls and whatnot around the offshore client are a lot stricter. Offshore banking in itself is a different type of business where the how to say, you are like a foreign bank, only focus on clients who are offshore. So you, for all intents and purposes, you just domicile here. You just have an office here, but you do not interact with the local population. That's what offshore banking really is. So in the context of St. Martin, that is not taking place. What the local banks do, they do interact with the non-resident or offshore client, but give them loans and facilities and services that they can take advantage of onshore.
Okay. So earlier on, I asked you about the bond that was floated last year. But another thing that comes to mind as well is some of the major projects we have here relating to our government-owned companies like GEBE and the airport. Was there any consideration made to also be a partner in investing in these projects? And how would that go about?
But I am sure that over the years it can be shown that the commercial banks on this island have assisted government-owned entities. The Causeway Bridge that was built, banks participated in the bond issue. The banking sector here over the years have played their role in assisting government in achieving some of the larger infrastructure projects on the island. And again, once the opportunity is bankable, it could be government, it could be private enterprise, we will participate. The key thing is once the opportunity is bankable.
Okay. Does the association have a position on dollarization, as this is, of course, one of those other buzzwords I would say as well?
I have a position on dollarization. I would not speak for the Bankers Association in this regard.
Okay.
I saw, the central bank did a presentation to Parliament quite recently, maybe a couple of months ago, if I'm not mistaken, on dollarization. And the central bank also made that presentation to the Bankers Association here. And I am fully supportive of the position that the central bank has taken with respect to dollarization. In a nutshell, they do not recommend dollarization to the island. And I've said that from day one. I did not agree with dollarization from the time it was floated many years ago, some years ago. Why is that? A few things why. St. Martin right now is enjoying the best of both worlds. You have your local currency, which gives the central bank certain monetary tools that they can use in the event that there's a crisis. And you have a lot of hard currency floating around on the island. You cannot get it better than that. Now, why change that? Right?
Can you further define what you mean by hard currency?
U.S. currency and euros.
Okay.
Many of the Caribbean territories, they have a challenge generating foreign currency in their island. St. Martin is blessed that St. Martin generates a surplus of foreign exchange that it needs, so much so that it assists Curacao in Curaçao's foreign exchange needs. And one of the things that people underestimate is the psychological aspect related to the guilder versus the dollar. The main reason why many on the French side shop on the Dutch side is because the euro is stronger than the guilder, and vice versa the dollar, because the guilder is pegged to the dollar. They believe they get more for their money, right? So when the tourists come knowing that your currency is the guilder, they have a stronger currency, so they, in their mind, I am getting 2 for 1 or 180 for 1, right? So my currency is stronger. And I think that plays a key role in the tourists coming here and the commerce that we see from the French side. You make it now the same dollar. It's going to make it so easy for the tourists to compare. Wait, but that item costs the same thing outside. Same thing back where it come from. Why would I buy it from St. Martin? Yes. Now, one of the other things that people did not realize when the discussion with dollarization came up, the whole thought of the license fee going away was going to make the cost of the transaction cheaper. But people did not realize that it was proposed to raise 3 times the amount that the license fee was generating through using the dollar by taxing transactions. Nobody realized that. So how can you make 3 times more money and then say that the transaction is cheaper? Because what happens now, rather than having the transaction, the fee on a limited number of transactions, most likely the fee would have been on a range of transactions to generate 3 times the amount of money that you were generating before. So it was not really cheaper, right? So there are other reasons I could go into why I had a challenge with dollarization. I've just mentioned one more. One of the things that protects a banking sector is foreign exchange restrictions. So the banks from United States, say for instance, the banks in USVI, they're in the Caribbean. They are going to think twice before they lend to locals. Why? Because to get their monies back out, the central bank can introduce foreign exchange restrictions on any investments they make here through lending people money, because when you lend someone money, you have invested in them. Yes? Mm-hmm. So the investments they may have made here by lending here, they can have a challenge getting back those monies if the central bank introduces foreign exchange restrictions. So that's one of the things that causes other banks to think twice before they start to lend in a jurisdiction where there is a different currency as the national currency. Now you dollarize. You open up your local banking sector to places that have the US dollar as their currency to lend in, probably much cheaper because they're not going to put offices here. They can just stay from where they are, right? Take a mortgage, help you online, and give you your money, just like what WI.B was doing. You remember these Euro loans?
No.
Years ago, residents of the Dutch Antilles were able to borrow funds from WI.B Bank in Holland because everybody had the same currency. There wasn't any euro. Then it turned to euro. It then caused a problem for many here because the euro started to appreciate against the dollar, so people's loan payments became higher, right? But why was WI.B Bank able to do that in the first place? Because the guilder was the guilder. It was easy. Do you see people borrowing from WI.B Bank anymore? No, because it's a different currency. They have the euro. So it's the same thing. So when you dollarize, you open up the local banking sector to others, and then what happens? You weaken the local banking sector because they're not getting as many loans as before. The deposits may drop. And when that happens, what you think will happen next? Job retrenchment, reduction in services and facilities. Because you are now competing with not just who are here locally, you are competing with the banks in USVI, with the banks in Miami, with the banks in the United States of America, who may decide, hey, maybe I can do a little mortgage lending in St. Martin. Don't have an issue with getting back my investment because they have the US dollar, just like me, and give them very easy terms because I don't need to go down there and invest in a building and all this sorts of stuff. So these are other issues that come into play that were never part of the discussion. So, and then you may even ended up with capital flight. And if when people decide to deposit at a bank, they look at the performance of a bank. So let's assume that you start to see the banks in St. Martin making less money because the competition become greater, you're going to say, hey, maybe I need to start to store my deposit somewhere else. Maybe I need to start putting my deposit in Anguilla, in USVI, in Miami, because there are no restrictions. There are no restrictions. And what that does again, weaken your banking sector. So those are some of the reasons that I never agreed with dollarization in the first place. But again, the presentation by the central bank was very comprehensive, and in summary, they agreed that it is not something that they will recommend. And the amount of changes to systems, all that you have to do, it's a lot of money to spend. Who do you think is going to pay for it when this thing happens? The customers, and not just the bank customers, everybody's customers who have to make those changes and spend that money. They want to get it back from somebody. Somebody has to pay. So, again, that's my view on dollarization.
Okay. Understood. I appreciate your elaboration on that. Something else that I would appreciate if you can explain is, I guess I'm referring to buzzwords now, but you often hear the laws. Mm-hmm. Can you detail how this relates to our banking industry?
Okay. Under the Obama administration, Obama did something that was very clever. Kind of, to try to break it down as simple as possible. You remember that the Obama administration felt that people were evading paying taxes, mm-hmm. right? And one of the ways by doing that is to have monies outside of the United States of America. So the United States of America decide, okay, if you are a financial institution and you want to interact with our banks, you have to tell us any U.S. citizen, resident, green card holder, and they had a whole criteria. You have to tell us if you have any of these people banking at you and what is the balance that they hold in an account with you. So basically what the FATCA law did, the FATCA law required banks outside of the United States of America or countries outside of the United States of America to report any U.S. citizen who held balances in banks in that country. That is basically what the FATCA law was all about.
Okay. One of the major concerns of the population, discussions you hear across the board in Parliament, etc., is as it relates to being able to set up a bank account. Mm-hmm. And considering the central bank's position on requiring an ID and source of income, can you explain why there are extra hurdles to go through just to be able to open up a bank account?
Well, first of all, the central bank president was not exhaustive in his answer to the question that was raised when he was in Parliament. So yes, he did mention a few things, but the presentation was not about opening bank accounts. So what he said there was not exhaustive. Indeed, the easiest bank account to open is a regular personal bank account, and you need updated ID, as he would have mentioned. You need proof of your address, and you need to demonstrate the source of the deposit or the funds that will be coming into this account. Now, one may ask, why do you need to show proof of address? Let me explain why. There are resident personal accounts and non-resident personal accounts. One attracts license fee, one does not. Okay? So we need to know for surety whether someone is a resident, so they can have a resident account, or whether they are a non-resident. Because if we give a non-resident a resident account and transactions take place in that account that should have been subject to the license fee that is paid to the government, and we do not take that license fee we get into trouble. We get fined. We could lose our license because we will not have respected the requirements of the central bank. So that's why, as stressful as it may sound, proof of address is important, because we need to know whether you are a resident and a legal resident, or whether you are a non-resident, because you should not and you are not allowed to give non-residents resident accounts. Now, on the business side, is a lot more technical, and there are two areas with respect to opening an account that has to be satisfied for any business account. One, there is the know your customer documentation. Who owns this business? Your shareholder register. Who represents this business? Your Chamber of Commerce extract. What is this business allowed or not allowed to do? Your articles of incorporation. Now, depending on what those documents say, there may be need for additional information. For instance, the central bank requires that you get to the ultimate beneficial owner, which has to be a person. Okay? So let's say, Ralph, you incorporated Ralph Inc. or Ralph Ltd. or Ralph NV. And you say that the shareholder is Derek NV. We haven't seen a person as yet. So we now need to see who owns Derek NV. So if Derek NV is owned by Liberty NV, we still haven't reached a person. So you follow the documentation until you get to the individual, because according to the central bank's regulations, you must know who the ultimate beneficial owner is, right? So that's the first side of it. Quickly, the second side is the transaction monitoring side, because this is required by the anti-money laundering and the anti-terrorist financing law that the Parliament of St. Martin passed. And that law, I did a presentation for the Chamber, a webinar, and I referred to that law. And that law requires banks to understand the character of the account that they onboard. And the only way to do that is to understand what is going to pass through this account. And not just some person come and tells you, I'm going to deposit $100 a month. Show me where it's going to come from. You can't just make it up, right? Financial statements, business plans, income tax returns, right? We have got to build a profile, because let's say, for argument's sake, you are a barber, okay? And you come to the bank and say, I'm going to deposit $1 million in this account in a year. Okay? Doing what? Barbering. Come on. How many heads in a day you can cut in 24 hours? You can't make $1 million. So you just can't come and say stuff. You have to provide proof or substantiation. And this is by law, to determine what you are going to deposit. So people get frustrated because it's not just a 1, 2, 3. But these are things.
I guess it's because a lot of innocent people then suffer to extent, particularly if you look at small business that.
No, I wouldn't use the word suffer. These guidelines and these rules and laws are in place for reasons. St. Martin needs to demonstrate to the international community that they're serious about protecting the integrity of the financial system from terrorists, financiers, and from money launderers.
Understood.
Right. They have to, or not, we will get cut off from being able to participate in the financial system internationally. And if that happens, we'll all starve on the island. You won't be able to import stuff. Right? So the banks are playing their part in ensuring that the integrity of the system is maintained. And trust me, Ralph, the people have the documentation. They just feel that they should not give it in most cases. And they just feel that they tell you stuff, you're just to believe it. You're not to question it. You're not to ask to corroborate it. Right? And when you ask questions along that score, along that line, they get frustrated and they say, oh no, this process is too long. Now, I will admit that sometimes because especially in light of COVID, a lot more people are incorporating entities and coming up with small businesses and whatnot, and they want to operate legit. So they register at the chamber, they get their articles and whatnot. So because the requests are so many, right, it takes a little longer than usual. But for sure, when we get to you and you have your documentation in order and your ducks line up in order, it's an easy process.
Okay. And even as you mentioned, money laundering and anti-terrorism financing, would you say that on St. Martin, that is a case that have to be reported often?
I've not known of any terrorist financing, honestly. But again, I know that the banks are vigilant. We have systems in place like Safe Watch and these types of systems that once transactions happen, they're able to detect, whether or not these transactions are intended for terrorists. We get updates every so often from our regulator here regarding rogue nations and people who have sanctions against them and whatnot. And these things are fed into our systems that, transactions don't escape, as it were. So I think that the banking sector here is doing a very credible job in protecting the system against these two types of threats.
Okay. Another thing that would be great if you can explain is the challenges that exist, that make it difficult for St. Martin to participate in, online payment systems or even applications.
Mm-hmm.
And is this something that the banks can assist in?
No, and I'll tell you why. And even the central bank has a challenge here. There are many businesses overseas that do not want to accept credit cards issued in the Caribbean. It's just the way it is. So I'll give you an example. I am a avid Formula One racing fan. There's something called Formula One TV that you can subscribe to. And I went on the site to subscribe to Formula One TV. And I put in my credit card to make the payment on an annual basis, and it rejected my credit card. So I called the number, and by the way, the number was in Holland. And I said, I'm trying to subscribe. Here's my information. And the guy says, oh, your card is issued in Caribbean. I said, yes. He said, we're not going to accept it. I said, why? He says, that's just our policy. It had nothing to do with who I was, whether or not I'm able to pay. They just refused to accept a credit card issued in the Dutch Antilles, in the Dutch Caribbean. Oh. And yes, and there are some merchants like that, and why, for them, the risk. PayPal cut off St. Martin. The central bank asked them why, and they did not answer. Right? They just do not. If you have an old PayPal account, they will not get rid of you, but they're not onboarding any new PayPal accounts from people in St. Martin. Why? Who knows? So these are things that are outside of the control of the banking sector. And it's unfortunate because to me, they're saying that we are all criminals. We are all risky. And I don't think that that's fair, but we have no ability to influence that. That's their decision. But this is something that it's not only us. This is something that is also faced by other Caribbean islands, where simply because you are in the Caribbean, any bin numbers that identify you as Caribbean, they're not going to accept.
Okay. So then in regards to that, from a professional standpoint, what do you think St. Martin particularly can do to improve its financial sector and its reputation? Do you think that issues of money laundering and so forth have to do with that?
Well, I think the island has went a long way in dealing with the with these issues. As you know, various laws were passed in Parliament And St. Martin has been able to move now to the fourth round, I think it is, of the evaluation process from the CFATF, which is a feather in the cap of St. Martin. So indeed, I believe that the government is trying their best to deal with these issues at hand. And I could just encourage them to continue to do that. The institutions on the island that know what part they have to play in this fight, that they do their best, and demonstrate to the international community that we are serious about protecting the integrity of the financial system.
Okay. So back to another buzzword. What can the public expect as far as the rise of crypto, blockchain, and so forth from the banks? And has the association or just Windward Island Bank considered creating options for customers to buy and sell crypto on their platforms?
I know that the central bank is hosting a session on cryptocurrency. This is something that has been knocking around for some time. I really don't know. Yeah, I don't know where this is going to go in terms of whether or not the local banks on the island will embrace it in terms of making it available or some platform for trading and whatnot. I really don't know. This is still, it's certainly new for the Caribbean in a large degree, but it has its vulnerabilities too. I don't know if you saw, there was a report I think earlier this year where this guy, for fun, he hacked $500 million or something, a large sum of money in cryptocurrency. He gave it back, but he did it for fun. So when you move from fiat currency to digital currency, you also have to talk about protecting it. And we know cybercrime is the most flourishing crime there is today. And the cost to protect against cybercrime is astronomical. So I really don't know where this cryptocurrency thing is going to go. People are getting involved. Governments are getting involved. I know Barbados, for instance, they're taking a hard look at it. It's left to be seen.
Okay. And I'm now was just thinking about what you said earlier as far as, the regulations you have to abide by in regards to the central bank in opening an account and so forth. But I guess fundamentally, or is it, so can a bank deny a person, an account?
Of course. If you refuse to provide...
Wouldn't it be... Isn't it not considered a right, I guess, to have?
No. A bank, very clearly, all the banks on this island are private entities. Yes, they are governed by a regulator and they are governed by the laws of the land. But at the end of the day, they are also private entities. And if any client does not want to provide the documentation as required by law, because while the law is not prescriptive in saying you must have black, yellow, green, blue, the law demonstrates what you need to comply with, right? And you provide the documentation to ensure, or you request the documentation to ensure that you're satisfying the law, or the central bank regulation. So if a client does not want to provide that, of course the bank has a right to not onboard the client. Or if the client lies, right? Of course the bank has the right not to onboard the client. So it's not an absolute right for sure. We will love that people be able to interact within the banking sector, because remember, the more customers we have, the more money we make. Why would we not want customers? But you want compliant customers. That's what you want, right? Because you cannot be exposing, if I expose the bank to undue risk, remember, it is your money. It is your parents' money, your brothers, your sisters, your friends' monies that are sitting in the bank. We have to protect those as well.
Okay. So my final question for you is, considering the impact of the pandemic, would you say that there is an increase in the amount of auctions the banks are engaged with presently?
Windward Islands Bank, no. I said this to the IMF last week, I believe it was. which it was nice to say, we have seen now some of the lowest delinquency percentages ever in the pandemic. That's the truth, right? So it tells me that people out there are focusing on paying their loans and keeping their loans up to date. And we are also working with customers to try to avoid having to auction properties and whatnot. But I would not say that the amount of auctions out there are any greater than before the pandemic. I haven't really seen it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sir. I would like to thank you so much for coming on the program. Definitely felt like a course, a learning session, and I appreciate that you're very open to answer all these questions. So, is there anything final you'd like to add?
Well, I just want to thank you, Ralph, for the opportunity as well to clarify some of these things for your listeners. And feel free to call on me anytime that you need any clarity.
Okay, appreciate it. And to all viewers and listeners, that was Derek Downs from the St. Martin Bankers Association. And do take care and tune in tomorrow for our next program.